lasting impact. A cardinal who joined Pope Francis on his trip to Iraq shares the most meaningful moments. Abortion funding. Democrats on Capitol Hill seek more money for abortions. Tonight, the reaction from pro-life groups. Economic fallout. President Joe Biden visits a small business hurt by the coronavirus crisis. And St. Junipero Serra. Learn about the multi-million-dollar plans to renovate his Carmel mission. On EWTN News Nightly for Tuesday, March 9th, 2021. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. I'm Tracy Sable. President Joe Biden heads to a hardware store to talk about financial relief for small businesses. He says it is important to focus on employers with fewer than 20 workers hit hard by the pandemic. White House correspondent Owen Jensen reports. Owen?
Tracy, good evening to you. In a speech last month, President Joe Biden alluded to countless small businesses, mom and pops, that have been claimed by the pandemic. Now, for survivors helped by the Paycheck Protection Program, well, their struggle continues.
President Joe Biden meets with small business owners.
Hey, everybody, how are you? Good to see you.
The owners of W.S. Jenks & Son hardware store and Little Wild Things Farm got financial help from the Paycheck Protection Program created under the Trump administration and continued under President Biden.
The biggest challenge is what we're going to do with our staff. You know, there were so many uncertainties related to what the virus actually did.
The focus now, recovery. The deputy director of the National Economic Council addressed reporters in the White House briefing room today.
So I want to take this opportunity to say to the small business owners out there, there's still plenty of time left in this program. There's still plenty of money available to you. Go to SBA.gov.
A new poll by the Associated Press Nork Center for Public Affairs Research finds roughly 4 in 10 Americans say they're still feeling the financial impact from the loss of a job. Black and Latino households, as well as young Americans, are among the hardest hit.
As you said, the vaccine rollout is accelerating. Obviously, that in many ways is the key to accelerating the economic recovery.
Members of the military are feeling the pandemic pain too. First Lady Jill Biden on the U.S. West Coast today at Joint Base Lewis McChord in Washington, meeting with military families.
I see how resilient you are in so many things, whether it's changing jobs or a new school, becoming the default parent, moving yet again, and then having to say goodbye to friends and families just to make it work.
And looking ahead, President Joe Biden will deliver his first primetime address this Thursday discussing the pandemic. As for when he'll deliver his first formal news conference, well, that remains to be seen. At the White House, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
On Capitol Hill, the House is scheduled to vote tomorrow at the latest on the most recent version of President Biden's $1.9 trillion COVID relief bill. It is a bill that critics say does nothing to stop taxpayer-funded abortions. Capitol Hill correspondent Eric Rosales reports.
Unlike all 4 previous bipartisan COVID relief packages which passed Congress, this latest bill does not contain any Hyde Amendment provisions, meaning your tax dollars can pay for abortions. Conservatives I spoke with say Democrats have the votes to pass it.
We don't want abortions. We don't want to pay for abortions. Taxpayers should not be paying for abortions in this nation.
Catholic Republican Congressman Greg Murphy tells me the $1.9 trillion relief bill tears down the firewall between taxpayers and abortions. And House Speaker Nancy Pelosi makes the Hyde Amendment, which has been in place since 1976, a thing of the past.
They're using this as a vehicle to basically push a far-left agenda.
In the COVID relief bill, some $50 million will be allotted for grants and contracts under the Public Health Service Act, which may be used to cover abortions. In addition, funding to state and local governments has no strings attached and can go to abortion providers. Pro-life Congresswoman Debbie Lesko says Planned Parenthood already got $80 million from the Paycheck Protection Program, money she says they've yet to give back.
I have written a letter, actually, I think to the Treasury Department saying, what are you going to do to get this money back?
Right to Life President Carol Tobias calls it devastating.
Sending a message and setting an example for the rest of the world that every life matters.
Alexis McGill Johnson, president of Planned Parenthood, thanked the, quote, reproductive health care champions in the Senate who defeated a cynical, harmful abortion coverage restriction amendment to the COVID relief bill. Democrats made it clear they don't want to stop at the Hyde Amendment. Congressman Jan Schakowsky and others held a presser outlining their efforts to repeal the Helms Amendment, which bars the United States from giving money to healthcare professionals around the world who provide abortion services.
It is time to take down the barriers that are protecting women all over the globe from having autonomy, controlling their own bodies.
Pro-life lawmakers tell me that they know they're in for a fight, but they hope to gain back seats in both the House and the Senate in the 2022 elections. At the Capitol, Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
U.S. Supreme Court decided Monday to revive a religious freedom lawsuit. 8 of the 9 justices agreed that a former student at Georgia Gwinnett College could sue school officials who blocked him from handing out Christian literature. The lawsuit will be allowed to continue even though the college has changed its policy. The Archbishop of St. Paul and Minneapolis calls on people to pray for peace. Archbishop Bernard Hebda is concerned about the level of anxiety surrounding the trial of Derek Chauvin, the officer accused of killing George Floyd. Archbishop Hebda writes, God calls us to be people of peace, hope, and love. He also calls us to be people of justice, not revenge. Officials at the Vatican say Pope Francis's trip to Iraq was, quote, an important step in promoting fraternity. The Holy See's Higher Committee of Human Fraternity says the recently completed trip promoted tolerance and inclusiveness worldwide, not just in Iraq. The group says it is preparing a study on the results of the visit. Joining us now from Rome is Cardinal Fernando Filoni, who accompanied Pope Francis to Iraq. He is also the Grand Master of the Equestrian Order of the Holy Sepulchre. Your Eminence, welcome. Thank you so much for your time today. So tell us, what were the highlights of the trip for you? And also, how do you think Pope Francis was received in Iraq?
Well, thank you, first of all, for inviting me. I can tell you immediately that the first thing I understood, it was very good for the people in Iraq, was the solidarity which the Holy Father brought to them. Is not simply question. Solidarity in a moment so difficult for Iraqi people, for our Christians, for the civil society, is the most important in this moment. And I think it was well accepted, well received. The enthusiasm was so high, and I can tell you the visit from this point of view was a success. And I am sure also the message the Holy Father gave to them, brought to them, will be understood, digested slowly, and will influence the present and the future of this society.
I know that you worked in Iraq for many years. Tell us, how has the country changed since you left, and how is it doing now?
Although the situation is very complex and the interests are so many, I have to say that Iraq and the society in Iraq must grow to find a way to unite itself. Iraq never, in its 100 years of history, was a united nation, was something united from the deep. It was just a province in the Ottoman Empire. Today, we have so many tribes, groups, religions. So, mix all of them together.
And looking forward to the future, how do you see the future for Christians in Iraq?
Well, the Christian community is half from the time when I was there. Many left because the last conflict, but others left Iraq immediately after Saddam Hussein ended. But I have to say that the migration started at least in 40 years, when the work and more the wars with Iran, the war with Kuwait, the war between Saddam and the Kurds left so many people dead, wounded, with deep scars. So in this complicated moment in which they now are, if there is a peace, if you find the possibility of security, I think dialogue will flourish.
Well, Your Eminence, thank you so much for your time today. It's been an honor.
Thank you.
Well, as we just heard, the trip to Iraq was deeply meaningful for the Holy Father and those from the Vatican who accompanied him. So how was it received in Iraq? Joining us now is Alejandro Bermudez, Executive Director of the CNA ACI Group. He joins us now from Iraq, where he was on the ground for the Holy Father's trip, and he remains in that country right now. Alejandro, always so good to see you. So we've heard the reaction of the trip from the Vatican. How was it received in Iraq from your perspective?
Is especially here where I am in Tracy, which is in northern Iraq, in what is known as Kurdistan, in Erbil, where the mass take place on Sunday. Everybody is in cloud nine. I mean, people are still talking about it. The tremendous number of Christian young kids that attended the mass, including 250 volunteers, are still pinching themselves. It's just incredible to be here. They can't believe that the Pope came to this place.
That is so wonderful to hear. Are there any indications that this trip will have a lasting impact, especially on interreligious dialogue there?
Well, in interreligious dialogue is a little bit hard to tell, but at least here in Erbil, in the area of the Kurdistan, which is relatively autonomous and is one of the most secure and peaceful areas in Iraq, the authorities of this region are very aware that the visit of the Holy Father put them in the map. So there is a real interest to show that at least this region is extremely tolerant to Christians. So I think that is a step forward. Now, from the side of Christians, of Chaldean Christians, or our fellow Catholics of Eastern Rite, the tremendous energy that has been created for them to remain in this place rather than leave it, to keep building institutions like the Catholic hospital, the Catholic university that is being built here, has just received a tremendous boost.
That's so great to hear. So exactly, from your perspective, how do you see the state of Christians in Iraq right now? I do understand there's a very young population there.
Yes, is incredible. During the mass, Tracy, there were 10,000 people, and you felt almost like if you were in a World Youth Day or in a youth rally. There is a lot of hope in terms of the number of the growing Christian population, and also how low the age is. How young they are. So, and the fact that the Pope came have inspired many of those young Christians that were asking themselves if they can continue living here or leave, like, 80% of them have done already. That mentality has changed. And I am not sure that some places like Mosul, for example, where the Pope went and that was completely destroyed by ISIS, will see the population come back. But other cities like Erbil, where the Catholic population has grown, I think it is very promising after the Pope's visit. It has been a life changer.
Well, Alejandro, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Alejandro Bermudez, Executive Director of the CNA Aussie Group. Thank you again.
Thank you, Tracy.
Coming up, coronavirus crisis. Dr. Bob Lahita joins us with an update. And fighting the pandemic across the globe, where they're opening new mass vaccination clinics. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention released new guidelines yesterday for people who have been fully vaccinated against COVID-19. According to the CDC, fully vaccinated people can gather indoors with others that are vaccinated without social distancing or wearing masks, and vaccinated grandparents can visit healthy grandchildren. So far, around 31 million Americans have been fully vaccinated. That is about 9% of the U.S. population. Joining us now to talk more about these guidelines and what it means for all of us is Dr. Bob Lahita, Director of the Institute for Autoimmune and Rheumatic Diseases at St. Joseph Health. He is also a professor of medicine at Rutgers and New York Medical College. Dr. Lahita, welcome back. Always great to be with you. So let's talk about these recommendations. In addition to what we just mentioned, the CDC also says if you have been exposed to COVID-19, but you're already fully vaccinated, you don't have to quarantine or get tested. Talk about the significance of that for us.
That's very significant. And in fact, there's been a little pushback because the people who have not read the CDC guidelines are saying, oh, whoa, wait a minute, that can't be true. So somebody who has COVID-19, you do not need to stay away from those people if you've been vaccinated or get tested unless you have symptoms. Now, that doesn't apply to people in nursing home, long-term care facilities, or in prisons or places where there are a correctional facility where people are liable to be infected. If that's the case, then you should be quarantined for 14 days. And of course, in all of these instances where you don't know the people you're dealing with, you should wear a mask, social distance, and make sure you wash your hands, Tracy.
I know another one of the recommendations is to continue wearing masks out in public, even if you've been fully vaccinated. And I know a lot of people may be thinking, well, gee, I got this shot. I thought I was protected against the virus. Why do I have to wear a mask?
Yeah, well, one of those issues is, and it still contains, we have variants out there. We have the South African, British, and the Brazilian variant, and we're worried that people can be carriers. They can be vaccinated and be fine as far as themselves go, but they can transmit the virus to someone else. So there's a little disconnect. If you're sharp, you see the disconnect between the CDC recommendations and possibly the issue of transmitting the virus if you're somebody who's asymptomatic. So that's why we want you to wear a mask and continue to mitigate until such time as we have herd immunity.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you about that. We're hearing about people catching the virus after they've been fully vaccinated. Why exactly does that happen? And is it sort of like, say, the flu vaccine? If you're vaccinated and you get the flu, your symptoms aren't as severe.
That's correct, Tracy. If you have the COVID vaccine, one of the three, you will not enter the hospital, be admitted to the hospital. You may get sick, but you will not be admitted to the hospital. And the most important thing is you will not die. And, for people who have lost members of their families, et cetera, this is big news because we've lost so many people in the spring and summer of last year. So you need to know that the vaccine is protective. But, the flu vaccine, Tracy, only protects us 40% of the time. So you can get a mild case of the flu after getting the flu vaccine. Here, we're talking 90s, and I think the lowest number is between 75 and 80% protection. So it's really, really good.
And before I let you go, it's hard to believe that this time, a year ago, then President Trump announced guidelines to help stop the coronavirus. Initially, it was just 15 days to slow the spread, and now here we are. Can you talk about where we were, where we are now, and maybe what our future looks like? When do you think we can get back to normal?
Well, we were in a bad state in the spring and summer of last year. And at that time, we were totally quarantining everyone. And remember, we were struggling to get tested. I can remember sending tests off from patients in the hospital, which would take upwards of 6 to 7 days to come back. So we had people under investigation, we call them PUIs, and we had no idea. And we couldn't seem to control or get ahead of ourselves. Then the warp speed attempt to make this vaccine came about, and we started immunizing people in December. And now we're getting test results, PCR tests, rapid saliva tests, blood tests looking for neutralizing antibodies. All of that was coming about very quickly. Within a day, in November and December, we were seeing results almost immediately. It was breathtaking. The lines were beginning to decrease in size, and people were getting tested, and everybody knew who was infected and who was not, and who had neutralizing antibody. Then came December, and the vaccine started. The vaccines were being administered slowly but surely to healthcare workers, to vital people in nursing homes, long-term care facilities, and we saw the numbers of deaths drop gradually. It didn't happen suddenly, but we're seeing now where the numbers went from, say, 200 patients in the hospital per day to now around 60. And in the intensive care unit, those numbers also dwindled, less people being intubated. We knew more about how to treat the disease, and we knew more about doing intubations and ventilating patients without intubation. So that was all very exciting. And now we're doing 2 million vaccinations a day with one of 3 vaccines. And I'm very excited to say that we're seeing this huge number, as you mentioned, 9% of our population immunized. And I have to stress that if you're frightened about these vaccines, you shouldn't be, because remember what I said, you will not wind up in the hospital and you will not die. And that's the most important thing, because I have to tell you, all of us, all of the healthcare workers that I work with, we were all afraid that the next day would be our last, having worked so closely with these patients. And we're just delighted to be able to get the vaccine. It was a real gift. Tracy?
Absolutely. We've certainly come a long way. Dr. Lahita, thank you so much for your analysis. We always appreciate you coming on.
Thanks, Tracy. Pleasure is mine.
New Zealand has opened its first large-scale vaccination clinic as the country scales up its efforts to protect people from the coronavirus. The clinic in South Auckland will initially target household members of border workers. New Zealand has stamped out community spread of the virus and therefore considers border workers and their families the most vulnerable to catching the disease from infectious travelers. Peru began its second stage of immunizations this week with a vaccine of 3,000 homebound senior citizens as well as armed forces personnel. Teams made up of healthcare workers visited homes to inoculate seniors with the Pfizer vaccine. Up next, China takeover, how the central government is reshaping Hong Kong politics, and multi-million-dollar renovation. The plans to restore St. Junipero Serra's mission. China is exerting more control over Hong Kong politics.
Its size, composition, and formation method will be adjusted and improved.
A Chinese foreign ministry official announced the changes to Hong Kong's electoral system. Moving forward, a pro-Beijing committee that elects Hong Kong leaders will also choose a large part of the legislature instead of letting voters decide. 1 year ago today, Pope Francis started to broadcast his daily mass when Italy went into a hard coronavirus lockdown.
È il Dio della prossimità.
As a sign of closeness to the Universal Church, every morning Pope Francis broadcasted Holy Mass from his Santa Marta residence, offering prayers for different groups of people facing difficulties due to the pandemic. The live broadcast ended mid-May when the pandemic situation improved in Italy. In Turkey, authorities have arrested a scam artist who reportedly tried to claim ownership and sell a Catholic basilica. According to International Christian Concern, a man and accomplices gathered and forged documents claiming to show they were the owners of the Basilica of St. Anthony of Padua, the largest Catholic church in Istanbul. And you can learn more about the story by visiting our partners at CatholicNewsAgency.com. And finally tonight, a mission in California founded by St. Junipero Serra recently received some good news. The Carmel mission in California is turning 250 years old this fall, and a restoration project last month received a $1.8 million grant. That was nearly half of the $4 million needed, and now it appears the work will be done in time for the anniversary. The money mostly is being used to repair buildings. Before the pandemic, the mission museums drew more than 300,000 visitors each year. We thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Tracy Sable. Good night and God bless.